300 letters arrived on the same Tuesday morning in late November, dropped off in a weathered canvas bag by the mail carrier who said he had never delivered anything quite like it in 31 years on the route. He had needed a second trip. They came from every direction. Some had crayon drawings on the envelopes, some had return addresses from college dormitories. One had a postmark from a Navy base in Okinawa. Another came from a zip code across town that Adele did not recognize until she read the name inside and understood it was a former student who had stayed in the city and made something of himself here. The woman who received them sat at her kitchen table for a long time before she opened the first one, her hands resting on top of the pile, a cup of coffee going cold beside her. Her name was Adele. She had stood at the corner of Maple and Fifth for 23 years. Every weekday morning from 7:15 to 8:45, and every afternoon from 2:45 to 4. She had worn the orange vest in the rain, and the orange vest in the cold, and the orange vest in the August heat when the asphalt shimmered and the air sat still as a wall. She had held the sign that said, "Stop," and she had watched the cars slow, and she had walked the children across, one hand raised, her body a human shield between the street and whoever needed to get to the other side. She had never thought of it as much. It was just the corner. It was just what she did. What she did not know on that Tuesday morning with the canvas bag on her kitchen floor and the letters stacked in front of her was that one of those envelopes did not hold a letter at all. Adele was 63 years old. She was a woman of medium build and careful posture, brown skin worn warm and deep from years outdoors, hair gone fully silver now and kept short and neat. She had been widowed at 51 when her husband Roy died from a heart attack on a Thursday evening while watching the news. They had rented the same two-bedroom house on Clement Street for 17 years, and after Roy was gone, she went on renting it because the landlord, Mr. Petrikes, was a decent man who fixed things when they broke and never raised the rent more than a small amount at a time. She had a daughter in Atlanta named Camille who called on Sundays and visited at Christmas. She had a church she attended on Saturday evenings because the Saturday service was smaller and quieter, and the choir stayed humble. She was not a woman who expected unusual things to happen to her. She was a woman who expected the corner to be cold in January, and she planned accordingly. The retirement had been the principal's idea, or rather the principal had been the one to finally say it out loud. His name was Mr. Delgado, and he had worked at Edgemont Elementary for 11 years, the last 7 of which he had watched Adele through his office window every morning. He had tried to tell her in September, when she came in to sign her annual paperwork, that she did not have to keep doing this if her knees were giving her trouble. She had looked at him in a way that ended the conversation. He had tried again in October. She had been more patient that time, but no less clear. She said she would think about it. In early November, she told him she would finish the semester. He nodded and thanked her for everything she had given, and when she left his office, he stayed sitting at his desk for a moment, feeling the weight of a thing he could not quite name. He picked up the phone and called the 4th grade teacher down the hall. Then he called the 3rd grade teacher. Then, before he could stop himself, he called the parent liaison and the school secretary and the retired librarian who still came in twice a week to help with reading groups. And he said to each of them, "I think we ought to do something for her." And word spread the way word spreads in a school where people know each other's children. The letters were Mr. Delgado's idea, but they became something bigger than he had planned. If you have ever had someone walk you safely across a street when you were small enough that the cars seemed enormous, you know what Adele was. You know the feel of that orange vest at the edge of your vision, the arm held out like a gate, the voice that said, "You could go now." Leave a comment if you remember someone like that in your own life, because the people who hold us safe at the edges of the world deserve to know that we remember. The letters came from parents of current students. That was expected. They came from teachers who had worked at Edgemont over the years and moved on to other schools. They came from the woman who ran the coffee cart 2 blocks down and said that every morning she had watched Adele from across the street and that seeing her there had made her feel better about things without her being able to explain why. They came, most unexpectedly, from former students. Someone had tracked down an alumni email list that was 14 years old and passed along the address, and from that one forwarded message, the letters had multiplied. Adele read them slowly. She was not a fast reader, and she did not try to rush. She read them in order of how they were stacked, which was no order at all, and each one she folded and set aside in its own small pile. A few of them made her press her lips together. One of them made her laugh, a short, surprised sound, from a young man now in his second year of college who said she had stopped him from getting hit by a car at least 11 times because he had been the kind of 10-year-old who never looked before he ran. He wrote that he was studying to be an engineer and that he thanked her every time he waited for a light. She folded that one, slowly. Another letter came from a woman who had taught at Edgemont for 6 years before taking a job closer to her mother's house in another state. She said she had not thought of Adele in several months and then had received the forwarded email from someone on the alumni list and had sat down and written immediately because there were some people you carried without knowing it and only recognized when someone said the name. She said that on her worst teaching days, the ones where she wondered whether any of it was reaching anyone, she used to watch Adele through the window of her classroom and feel better. She did not explain exactly why. She did not need to. One of them, from a girl who was now a pediatric nurse in Cincinnati, made Adele put the letter face down on the table and look out the window for a full minute before she could continue. The girl, whose name was Maya now and whose letter came on hospital stationery, said that in the second grade she had been terrified of crossing streets. Adele had noticed. She had never said anything directly, had never made a fuss, had simply begun extending her hand to Maya, specifically, just her hand, palm open, casual as anything, each morning for the entire school year. Maya said she was 29 now and could not remember exactly when the fear had lifted, but she knew it had something to do with the crossed street and the open hand and the morning after morning of it. Adele read that letter twice. She had not remembered the specific child. She remembered many children, their faces and rhythms and which ones ran and which ones dragged their feet, but the particular transaction Maya described, the offered hand, she could not place it. It was not because she had not cared, it was because she had done it without thinking, the way you do things that are simply part of who you are. That was what Adele didn't understand about herself. She thought of her work at the corner as small because she had never measured it against anything. She had never added up the mornings, she had never counted the children. If she had, she would have arrived at a number somewhere around 45,000 crossings across 23 years. But she had not counted, because people who do the faithful small thing do not generally keep a ledger. The world keeps it for them. She was on letter 112 when she found the envelope that was different. It was cream-coloured, heavier stock than the others, with her name typed on the front in clean letters. No crayon, no return address. She almost set it aside, thinking it might be a piece of business mail that had gotten mixed into the pile by accident. She picked it up again, and something about its weight made her pause. She turned it over. A small embossed seal on the back flap, a letter C inside a simple circle. She opened it. Inside was a folded card, and inside the card was a handwritten note. Beneath the note, 2 keys on a small silver ring. The note said, "Dear Adele, you will not remember me. You held your hand out for my daughter every morning for a year when she was 6 years old, and I was going through the hardest time of my life. I watched you from my car. I never stopped to say thank you. I am saying it now. The house at 14 Birch Lane has been empty for 4 months. It is yours if you want it. No signature, just the keys and the C." Adele sat for a long time. She set the card on the table and looked at the keys, and then at the window, and then back at the keys. Her mind moved around the edges of what she was holding without landing anywhere in particular. She thought about Roy. She thought about Mr. Petrakis and his increasingly frail walk, and the nephew in Greece who was beginning to ask about the property. She thought about her knees, which had been aching since September, the mornings when she had to hold the car door and lower herself in carefully, the afternoons when the cold got into them and stayed. She had not told anyone about the knees. It had not seemed like information anyone needed. She thought about the words on the card. She read them again. "You will not remember me." She had read those 5 words and understood something that took a moment to land. The person who had sent this had not written them bitterly. There was no accusation in them. They were simply a fact, offered without weight, as though the writer understood that Adele could not remember everyone and did not expect her to. It was almost tenderness, tendering the absence before she could feel it as a failure. She thought about the second-grade girl with the open hand, and she realized she still could not place her. She did not call Camille right away. She sat with it for the rest of the afternoon, the card and the keys on the table in front of her, the letters in their stacks around the kitchen, the cold pressing at the window, her coffee long since gone cold and left as it was. On the other side of that same afternoon, in a glass and steel office building 9 miles away, a man named Calvin was having a harder time sitting still. He was 54 years old, built wide in the shoulders and carrying the weight of a person who had spent years in meeting rooms rather than outdoors. He wore good suits because his assistant bought them and because he had long since stopped thinking about what he wore. He ran a commercial real estate development firm that had recently completed a mixed-use project on the east side of the city, and before that a residential portfolio that stretched across 4 counties. And before that, a decade of smaller work that he had done largely alone out of a shared office space with one folding table and a phone that rang in the wrong direction. He had started with nothing that most people would have recognized as something. He had grown up in a neighborhood where the houses were old and the streetlights went out every other winter and the schools kept trying with limited help from the outside world. His mother had worked a second shift at a laundry for 7 years to keep them in the same apartment, coming home at midnight with her shoes in her hand so she would not wake him. His father had been present in a way that was partial and unreliable, and Calvin had grown up understanding early that reliable was something you had to become, yourself. He had carried that understanding with him for 30 years, and it had made him successful, and it had made him careful, and it had not always made him easy to live beside. He had a daughter named Maya, who was 29 and who worked as a pediatric nurse in Cincinnati. She had her mother's directness and Calvin's stubbornness, and she had become a nurse because in the 2nd grade she had been the kind of child who noticed which of the other children was hurting and went and stood near them, not saying anything, just present. She did not remember learning to do that. It was simply how she had always been. He knew what was in Maya's letter because she had read it to him over the phone the night before she sent it, and after she had read it to him, he had sat in his car in the parking structure of his building for 11 minutes without getting out. Maya had described the 2nd grade crossing guard and the offered hand, and Calvin had listened, and at the end she said, "I don't even know if she's still there." And Calvin had said, "I'll find out." And Maya had said, "Daddy, you don't have to." And he had said quietly, "Yes, I do." What Adele did not know and Calvin did not know at that particular moment was that they had been connected for longer than either of them understood. Calvin's firm had, 3 years earlier, bought and renovated a small bungalow on Birch Lane as part of a tax-incentivized neighborhood investment program. The house had been empty when they bought it, the previous owner having moved to a care facility. Calvin's team had spent 4 months on it, replacing the roof, refinishing the floors, updating the kitchen in a modest and practical way, leveling and reseeding the small backyard. The renovation had come in $40,000 under budget, and Calvin had noted the fact and moved on. He had driven past Edgemont Elementary 4 times in his life without knowing it. The last time had been 2 months ago, when he was visiting a potential acquisition on the next block. He had idled at the corner of Maple and 5th and watched a woman in an orange vest help a knot of small children across the street. He had watched her lift one hand to stop a car that was moving too slowly, her posture easy and certain, and then guide the children across with the other hand extended behind them like a wing. He had thought briefly that he did not remember the last time he had stopped at a crossing guard. He had driven on. He had not connected her to the story Maya had told him. He made the connection on a Wednesday morning, standing at a window in his office while his assistant went over his afternoon schedule. His mind was somewhere else. He was thinking about something Maya had said, that the crossing guard had been at that corner for more than 20 years, and he realized he had seen a woman at that corner, and she had been in an orange vest, and he had not registered her as a person with a history, only as a function, a pause in the traffic, a shape that told you to wait. The thought sat in him badly. He was 54 years old, and he had spent a great deal of those years learning to see clearly what other people missed. Figures on a balance sheet, potential in a neglected building, the hidden value in a block that the market had not caught up to yet. He had built something from that capacity. He had employed 60 people. He had taken his daughter to her first day of college in a car that was paid for and watched her walk across a campus quad with her shoulders back and her chin up, and he had cried quietly on the drive home because he had done the thing he was supposed to do, and it had worked. And he had driven past Adele for 23 years on his way to other things. He cancelled his afternoon. He drove to Edgemont Elementary and found Mr. Delgado, whose secretary tried to explain that he did not have an appointment. Calvin said he only needed 5 minutes and that it was about the crossing guard. The secretary looked at him with a different expression and told him to wait. Mr. Delgado came out of his office with his jacket on and his hands in his pockets. the cautious posture of a man who had learned to be careful about strangers arriving with things to say about his staff. Calvin introduced himself. He said he believed the crossing guard at Maple and Fifth had helped his daughter every day for a year in the 2nd grade, and that his daughter was now a nurse, and that he had not had the chance to say thank you properly at the time because he had not known. Mr. Delgado studied him for a moment. He said her name was Adele and that she was retiring at the end of the semester and that she had put 23 years into that corner. Calvin said, "I know about the letters." Mr. Delgado raised his eyebrows. Calvin said he wanted to send one of his own. He said he had thought about what would be appropriate. He said he had a house on Birch Lane that had been sitting empty for 4 months, and he could not find a tenant he trusted, and he did not want to sell it because the neighbourhood was changing in ways he believed in, and he wanted the house to go to someone who would be part of that. He said he knew how it might sound, and he understood if it was too much, but that he believed in doing things properly when you had the chance. Mr. Delgado looked at him for a long time. Then he said he would write down her address. The envelope arrived in the pile of 300 letters. Adele had not known to expect it. She had not known it was different from the others until she held it and felt the weight of the keys. She drove to Birch Lane on Thursday morning. She did not call anyone first. She had written down the address from the card, and she drove across town and found the house and sat in her car in front of it for a few minutes, looking at it through the windshield. It was a small bungalow, white with sage-green shutters, a front walk of smooth grey pavers, 2 small steps to the porch. The yard was modest and cared for. A maple tree in the corner of the lot had dropped most of its leaves, and the skeleton of it was clean and spare against the grey sky. There was a welcome mat in front of the door that was brand new and had not come from the person who sent the keys. She could tell that from here, and she understood someone had thought to put it there. A neighbour across the street walked to her car with her keys in her hand and glanced at Adele's car the way neighbours do when a car sits too long in front of a vacant house. Adele gave her a small wave, the kind that meant nothing to apologise for. The woman went on to her car and drove away. Adele got out. She walked up to the porch slowly, taking note of the steps, the condition of the railing, the way the porch boards sat solid without any give. She had spent enough years outdoors to read a structure, and what this one said was that someone had been careful. She stood in front of the door for a moment, and then, after a moment more, she put the key in the lock. The house smelled of fresh paint and the particular kind of quiet that belongs to a space that has been prepared for a person who is not yet there. The floors were light wood, refinished to a warm honey tone. The kitchen was small and sensible. There was a window over the sink that looked into the backyard, and through it she could see the reseeded grass, still young and fine, and the bare maple she had seen from the car on the other side of the fence. The light inside was grey and soft, and the rooms were warm. She stood in the kitchen for a while. She thought about Roy again. She thought that Roy would have laughed, not cruelly, but in the way he laughed at things that overturned his expectations, which was a long, exhaled sound that ended in a headshake. She could hear it. She thought he would have said, in his way, that it figured, and she thought he would have been crying at the same time because he was that kind of person. She did not cry in the kitchen. She ran her hand along the counter, the solid edge of it, and she looked out the window for a while longer. She drove home and called Camille. Camille was quiet for a moment after Adele finished explaining, and then she said, "Mama." Not as a question, just the word. Adele said, "I know." Camille said, "Who sent it?" Adele said she did not know, only the initial and the house. Camille was quiet again, and Adele could hear in the silence the same kind of thinking she herself had been doing all afternoon, the turning over of something too large to hold all at once. Then Camille said, "You've been at that corner for 23 years, Adele said. "I know that." "And someone watched you," Camille said. "All that time, and they remembered." Adele said yes. Camille said, "When was the last time you let anybody do something for you, Mama?" Adele did not answer right away. She thought about Mr. Petrakis, who had installed a new water heater 3 years ago and charged her half of what it cost. She thought about Gloria at church, who brought extra food to the potluck twice a month and always made sure a plate reached Adele before the end of the evening. She thought about the small, quiet ways people had been kind to her over the years and how she had accepted those things with gratitude, but without quite believing she was owed them. She said, "I accept things when people offer." Camille said, "That's not what I asked." Then she said, "You're going to take it." Adele said she hadn't decided. Camille said, "Yes, you have. I can tell by how you're breathing." Adele looked out her kitchen window at the backyard of the house on Clement Street, the narrow strip of it, the fence that had needed paint for 2 years and which she had been meaning to ask Mr. Petrakis about. She said she supposed she had. There was one thing she wanted first, though. She wanted to know who had sent the keys. Mr. Delgado was not surprised when Adele called him. He had been waiting for it in a mild way, with the specific calmness of a man who has set a thing in motion and understands it is now moving under its own weight. He told her the man's name. He told her what the man had said in his office. The short version, the part about the daughter and the second-grade year. He did not say more than that because he felt the rest of it belonged to them. Adele thanked him and sat at her table for a while after hanging up. She remembered then. Not the child, not the hand. She still could not locate the specific memory of a particular small girl asking to be helped across. But she remembered a car that had been there every morning for almost a full school year. A dark blue sedan parked just to the side of the crossing zone, and inside it a man who sat very still while his daughter got out and crossed. She remembered noticing him because he was careful. He always made sure his daughter was all the way up on the curb before he pulled away. That was all she had. But it was enough. She knew who it was. She found the number through Mr. Delgado's office. She called on a Friday morning, sitting at her kitchen table with all the letters still around her in their loose stacks. A man answered on the second ring. She said, "This is Adele from the corner." There was a pause. Then he said, "I know," she said, "the dark blue sedan. You always waited until she was on the curb." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I didn't think anyone noticed." She said, "I noticed." He didn't answer right away. When he spoke again, his voice had changed in a way that men's voices change when something shifts underneath them. He said, "She's a nurse now." Adele said, "I heard." She paused. "I'm proud of her. I don't have any right to be, but I am." He said, "You have every right." They were quiet together on the phone for a moment, the way people are quiet when they are both thinking the same thing and neither of them needs to say it. Then Adele said, "I'd like to take the house, if the offer is still standing." He said it was. She said, "I want to be clear about something. I didn't do what I did at that corner because I expected anything from it. I want you to know that." He said, "I know that. That's exactly why." She said she understood. She asked if he would be willing to tell her something honestly. She asked him if the house was given out of obligation or out of something else. She said she needed to know the difference because the difference mattered to her. He was quiet. He said he had asked himself the same thing. He said he had driven past that corner and not seen her. And when he finally understood what he had not seen, he had not been able to sit with that very comfortably. He said some of it was probably obligation. He said the part that surprised him was how much of it wasn't. He said his mother had worked a second shift at a laundry for 7 years, and he had known his whole life that those people, the ones who did the faithful, quiet thing in the rain and the cold for years on end, those people were the weight-bearing walls of the world, and that he had become comfortable enough that he had started to see past them, and that he did not want to be that kind of person. Adele listened. Then she said, "You waited until she was on the curb every time." He said he did. She said, "That's not an obligated man." He made a sound that was almost a laugh, but was something else. She said she would take good care of the house. He said he believed her. She moved to Birch Lane in the second week of January on a Saturday with Camille's help and the help of 2 men from her church who had a truck. It did not take long. Her furniture was modest, and she owned less than she sometimes thought she did. And by 4 in the afternoon, the rooms were arranged and the boxes were mostly unpacked, and Camille was standing in the kitchen making tea while Adele sat in the living room in Roy's chair, which had been reupholstered twice but was still the same chair, looking at the room around her. The maple in the backyard had a layer of ice on its branches that caught the low winter light and scattered it. She could see it through the back window from where she sat. Before Camille brought the tea, she walked from room to room in a slow circuit, her hands in her cardigan pockets, her footsteps quiet on the warm wood floors. The kitchen, with its window over the sink. The smaller bedroom that she decided would hold the sewing machine and the books. The main bedroom, where the afternoon light came through the window at an angle that felt generous, the way light does in a place that has been waiting for someone to fill it. She paused in the doorway of that room for a moment. She thought about all the mornings she had gotten up in the rented house on Clement Street and dressed in the dark so she could be at the corner by 7:15. She thought about doing it from here instead, from somewhere she did not have to be careful about. Camille came in with 2 cups and sat across from her. She said, "How does it feel?" Adele looked around the room. She looked at the floors and the walls and the window. She looked at Roy's chair, the arms of it under her hands. She looked at the light. She said, "Like I'm supposed to be here?" She had her last day at the corner on the Friday before winter break. Mr. Delgado and 6 of the teachers came out at the afternoon crossing time and stood on the curb watching. And the parents who picked up their children in person had been told, and most of them waited longer than usual, standing a little apart from one another on the sidewalk with their coats buttoned against the December cold. The children did not entirely understand what was happening, but they could feel that something was, and they were quieter than usual coming through the gate. One of the 4th grade teachers had brought her class outside. They stood in a row near the school's front entrance, small in their winter coats with their backpacks on, watching. One of them, a small girl with a yellow beret in her hair, kept looking at Adele and then looking away again, the way children do when they are trying to memorize something. Adele noticed her. She always noticed the ones who were paying close attention. Adele held her sign and she walked them across, small group by small group, the same way she had for 23 years. She did not make a speech. She did not expect one. She moved with the same steady calm she had always moved with. Her arm raised against the traffic, her body placed where it needed to be. She said the same thing she always said when the coast was clear. "You can go. It's safe." Short words. The right words. When the last child had reached the curb and the last car had been waved through and the crossing zone was empty, she stood for a moment and looked at the corner, the painted lines on the asphalt, the signal light blinking yellow in the early dark. Then she folded the sign under her arm, unclipped the orange vest, and walked to her car. Mr. Delgado called after her. He said her name once, and she turned. He was standing on the curb with his hands in his coat pockets and his breath making small clouds in the cold air. He said, "Thank you, Adele, for all of it." She said, "Thank you for the letters." He shook his head a little. He said the letters were not from him. She said, "The idea was." She gave him a long, steady look. "That was a generous thing." He nodded once, and she turned and got in her car. She sat for a moment before starting the engine. She looked at the corner through the windshield. 23 years of mornings. She tried to do the math, the rough, approximate math, and she gave up before she landed on a number because it was not a number she needed. Some things are not about the count. She started the car and drove home to Birch Lane. On the Saturday of that same week, she called Maya in Cincinnati. Maya was the one who had written the letter on hospital stationery, whose name she had read without connecting the dots because the last name in the letter was a married name, and Adele had not known to look for the connection. It was Camille who had found it, reading through the letters again while Adele was packing boxes, and who had said quietly, "Mama, look at this one." Adele had read it again, knowing what she was reading. She called on a Saturday morning, and Maya answered. There was a pause when Adele said who she was, and then Maya said, "Oh." And then she did not say anything else for a moment. Adele said, "I read your letter 3 times. Maya said, "I wrote it 4 times before I sent it." Adele said she had not remembered, and she said she was sorry for that. And Maya said there was nothing to be sorry for, that the whole point was that Adele had done it without needing to remember, that it was just what she did. And that was the part Maya had been trying to say in the letter. Adele said, "Your father is a good man." Maya said, "I know." Adele said, "He waited until you were on the curb." There was a silence on the phone that was warm and heavy with something that didn't need a name. Finally, Maya said, "Every single time, even when he was late, he never pulled away early, not once." Adele said, "I know." She didn't say what she was thinking, which was that the 2 of them, Calvin and his daughter Maya, had been raising each other without knowing it, the same way people do when they are both trying to be the kind of person the other one needs them to be. She did not say it because it was not the kind of thing you say. Some truths carry themselves without being spoken. She said goodbye and she went and made breakfast in the kitchen on Birch Lane, and she stood at the window over the sink and looked at the backyard and the young grass under the frost and the bare maple tree in the corner, which was beginning very slowly to show the first hair-thin proof of buds against the cold. She had been there 3 weeks. She was already home. There is a kindness that does not ask for credit. It shows up in the cold and the rain and the unremarkable mornings, and it holds out its hand, and it does not expect anyone to remember. But somewhere in the long accounting of the world, in the places where nothing is forgotten and everything eventually comes back to its source, it is written down. It is kept. What Adele had given across 23 years at the corner of Maple and Fifth could not be added up in a single number. It was in the nurse who wasn't afraid of streets anymore. It was in the college student who had written from a dorm room he had almost not made it to. It was in the Navy sailor at a base in Okinawa, 8,000 miles away, who still remembered the woman in the orange vest who had said every morning without exception, "You can go now, it's safe." It was in 300 envelopes that arrived in a canvas bag on a Tuesday morning in November. And it was in 2 small keys on a silver ring, sitting now on the hook just inside the front door of the house on Birch Lane, next to a coat she kept there for cold days and a pair of proper warm boots she had finally let herself buy. She went to church on Saturday evening and sat in the 4th pew from the back, the same pew she always sat in, and when the choir began she let herself cry a little, quietly, the way she did sometimes when the weight of a thing finally came clear. The woman next to her, whose name was Gloria and who had known Adele for 11 years, did not ask. She simply put her hand over Adele's on the pew between them and left it there. That was all. That was enough. Have you ever known someone who held the world steady for you without making a show of it? Leave a comment and tell me, because those people deserve to be remembered by name. The maple in the backyard at Birch Lane came into leaf in April, quietly, the way maples do, while Adele was standing at the kitchen window with her first coffee of the morning. She watched the green come in and she thought about Roy and she thought about the corner and she thought about a small girl in 2nd grade whose name she had not known she needed to remember. She stood there for a long time in the new light of a spring morning, in the first house that had ever been hers. The keys were on the hook by the door. She was right where she was supposed to be.